You know, when we talk about global conflict, I bet a certain map pops into your head, one that's been shaped by years of news coverage and big international headlines. It's a map we all think we know.
For the last few years, the story of global crisis has really felt like it's been anchored by the war in Ukraine, right? With the Middle East as this constant dramatic backdrop. But what if that story, that map in our heads, is actually pretty misleading?
So what if we tried a different metric, something that can't be spun or inflated? Just the raw number of human beings forced to flee their homes. Because when you look at the data through that lens, well, the whole map just completely changes.
46%. Let that sink in. That is the percentage of the world's internally displaced people, folks who've had to run from their homes but are still inside their own country, that live in Sub-Saharan Africa. We're not talking a fraction or a plurality. We're talking nearly half.
This chart just shows you the incredible scale we're dealing with. 38.8 million people in Sub-Saharan Africa alone. That one statistic tells you that the real epicenter of human displacement probably isn't where we've been told to look.
And that brings us to the core idea of this whole explainer. The continent carrying the world's heaviest displacement burden is, at the same time, a massive global blind spot.
Let's kick things off with a country that is, by literally every measure, the world's biggest displacement emergency. And yet, it stays almost entirely out of the global spotlight. We're talking about Sudan.
14.4 million. That is the total number of forcibly displaced Sudanese people, both inside and outside the country. To put that in perspective for you, 1 out of every 3 displaced people in all of Africa is Sudanese.
And this isn't just our take. It's backed up by expert analysis. The Africa Center for Strategic Studies confirms it. No other country on the entire planet has as many people internally displaced as Sudan. It is, without a doubt, the largest crisis of its kind.
Now, here's the crucial thing to understand. This is way more than just a war. It's a complete collapse of society. The source material calls it a rupture of administrative and judicial structures. The capital has been destroyed, famine is spreading, and the crisis is spilling over into neighboring countries, creating this massive regional contagion. There's just no system left for people to even think about returning to.
Okay, so now let's turn to another African giant of displacement, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But this is a very different kind of crisis. It's not about a sudden collapse. It's more like a slow, relentless, grinding fire.
And this slide illustrates the challenge perfectly. See, the DRC doesn't have those big, explosive events that break into the 24-hour news cycle. Instead, what it has is what the analysis calls continuous, grinding displacement. It's a crisis that just builds up year after year, becoming this permanent, yet somehow invisible feature of the landscape. So what's fueling this fire? Well, you've got over 100 armed groups fighting for control of the region's vast mineral wealth. We're talking cobalt, coltan, gold, the very things that power global technology. It's in our phones, it's in our laptops. This means the displacement happening there isn't just a byproduct of some distant conflict. It's directly connected to the global economy. This table really puts it all in stark relief. I mean, just look at the numbers for Sudan and the DRC. They're on par with, or even bigger than, the figures for Ukraine and Syria. But maybe the most alarming part is that last column, the trend. While Syria is seeing some gradual returns, the crises in Sudan and the DRC are actively getting worse. All right, so we've seen the what and the where, but that leads us to the most important question of all, right? Why? Why is displacement happening on this almost unimaginable scale across parts of the continent?
The analysis really points to 3 big factors that are all feeding each other. First, weak state institutions that just don't have the ability to protect or resettle their own people. Second, as we just saw in the DRC, resource competition, which turns displacement into an actual strategic goal. You have to clear the land to get to the minerals. And third, and this is terrifying, a massive funding gap.
This chart says it all, really. Just look at West and Central Africa. Since 2020, the number of displaced people has shot up by 48%. And in that same time, the UN Refugee Agency's regional budget was cut by 50%. The need is absolutely exploding, just as the world is turning its back.
And this brings us to our final and honestly most critical point. It's really easy to frame this as some distant humanitarian issue, but it's not. This is a matter of global stability. The source material makes this distinction very, very clearly. Yes, the moral case is overwhelming, of course it is, but the argument here is about stability. This level of human upheaval has consequences for everyone.
Because these crises don't stay contained, they create huge refugee flows that destabilize already fragile neighbors.
They create perfect recruitment pipelines for extremist groups. They cause entire regional economies to shrink, and they completely gut the institutions that might have prevented the next crisis. It's a vicious cycle with a truly global reach.
I want to leave you with this powerful statement from the analysis, because I think it reframes everything so well. This isn't just an African problem to be managed. This is the direct result of a systemic failure of international conflict prevention, and Africa is the continent absorbing the consequences. Which leaves us with one final, sobering question to think about. When the places that get all the world's attention are not the same as the places where the suffering is greatest, who ultimately pays the price for that blind spot?